What's going on, my fellow makers? Matt from Keep Making. Today I'm going to show you how I made these 3 Warcry boards in only 2 days. Let's do this.
Shall we begin?
Okay, so here's my problem. I play D&D, I have these long boards, and they all have a grid cut into them. Every single one of them. They're too big to play Warcry on. Pretty sweet when you have 2 or 3 people, but a one-on-one it's a little bit too big. So I'm going to start by measuring out my table that we play on, and then I'm headed to the hardware store to pick up a sheet of XPS glass. Now typically a Warcry board is 22 inches by 30 inches, but we're going to go for 24 by 30 because it was much easier to do that. Cutting them out with a sharp box cutter, and then they're good to be big. Now with the size of the sheet I bought, I could only get 3 boards, but 3 boards for about 35 bucks worth of XPS is a pretty good deal. So once I've cut them to size, I'm going to lay out some paper just so that I'm not mucking up my workspace too much with the tile grout. First, we're going to look at this Ionic or Mediterranean style Greek Roman type board. To start, I'm going to use Mod Podge or glue. I ran out of Mod Podge very early on, so I switched over to this cheap school glue and get it all over the base. Then I'm going to come in with some sanded tile grout, and it's just going straight on. This will definitely be the simplest of the 3 boards, and we'll get more advanced as we move forward. I put my tile grout through a sieve because I find it gets all the weird chunky bits and you don't get too much all in one place. After it's put onto the glue, I'm going to spray it all down with some isopropyl alcohol, around 70%. This is going to help bind all of this tile grout together because later on I'm coming in with some watered down Mod Podge and we're going to use that as a sealer. Now normally I'd use a spray bottle to use that watered down Mod Podge, but all of mine were gunked up and beyond use, so I had to resort to using a pipette, which made it take a real long time. Moving on to the future now, as we jump a day forward, I'm now able to apply my static grass because the base is all adhered, and so I'm just using some wood glue which has a lot of rigidity and will keep that static grass from falling over. This dries a little bit glossy, but as long as I get the full grass coverage, it shouldn't be an issue. Just using some 4 and 7 mil light grass from Woodland Scenics through my Woodland Scenics grass applicator. Static grass is awesome. If you haven't used it before, basically you're getting an electric charge that stands these nylon fibers up and simulates grass. And that pretty much does it for board 1. We'll jump over to board 2. If you've seen my videos before, you'll probably recognize this aesthetic. This is a board that's going to be made to match my floating island terrain. Now, what I do is mark out where I want some pools to go, and then I'm coming in with a knife and sort of chunking them out, and then I'm going to use a heat gun to sort of mold them into place and give a little bit more of a seal. I did end up going through the XPS sheet on some of these, and so I just used some tape as I'm going to be pouring in some epoxy later. Now my pours were really deep, so this texture doesn't really shine through in the end product, but it does influence the color a bit. So I'm using this light earth from AK Interactive, and I'm going all over these sort of pooled areas where the water is going to sit. While those are drying, I'll go on to applying the ground texture, and I'm just using the same school glue all over the base, and then I'm going to be putting on some more tile grout. So the same as the first board, I'm going to spray it down with isopropyl alcohol, then I'm using that matte Mod Podge and water to seal it all in place. And here's just a quick clip of why I put that paper down. You see the tile grout goes everywhere, and we want to keep as clean a workspace as we possibly can. Now we'll take another jump into the future here as I've come back to this piece the next day, and I'm just using the same mix I used on all of my floating island terrain, which is just like a black and a burnt umber mixed together to give it more of a muddy sort of look. Then I'm coming in and just giving it a bit of a dry brush and a highlight by mixing this off tan and this green color, which is the same as I did on my floating island terrain. So if you caught it on that last clip, I was a little heavy-handed with the dry brush, so these areas that have left streaks, we don't really want to keep those, but that's fine because I am coming through to flock this entire board. So I'm going to bust out the school glue again and we'll get to flocking. Now I'm using the same flock mixture as I did on my Unblighted, my Alariel, and my Floating Island terrain, which is a lot of green tea leaves, as well as some peat moss and reindeer moss mixed up with some woodland scenic green grass. And just like the tile grout, to seal it all in place, I'm spraying it down with more isopropyl alcohol and using that same matte Mod Podge watered down to go all over it. Now if you saw my Alariel video or the Floating Island terrain video, you know what's coming next. I need to put epoxy into these pools here. So to do that, I'm using very cheap epoxy from the dollar store, mixing it in with some golden blue paint, and then just pouring it in after I mix it with a little bit more isopropyl alcohol, just to give it a little bit more flow. Now this third build will be the most terrain heavy, and the reason I did this is because I needed to repurpose some old D&D terrain. So this is one of said pieces. I think this was for some sort of climactic. Now this is a great just modular terrain piece to throw down, but I just hate it because it's when I first started crafting. I don't know if that'll pick up on camera there, but just this edge is super hard and I hate it. It doesn't blend in well to any terrain, so I thought about giving it a big base, but then storage became an issue, and so in a weird way to combat that, I'm going to make more area to cover. I want to do something that's kind of like a valley, so if we have rocks on either side, this channel in the middle will be all-out warfare with paths that go up either way. It's a pretty common war game setup, but I think on the board this side it'll be very chaotic. You can have, you know, ranged units shooting down, but the idea is I'm going to take this old D&D piece, there we go, snap it in half like so, and we're going to try to make it a little less aggressive. This was too long. I don't know if I'll still even get use out of this, maybe just as a filler piece. We'll blend this all in with some Sculptamold, and we'll do the exact same thing on this side. But for that side, I'm going to use the offcuts, which I made, which are exactly perfectly this size. We're going to put some Woodland Scenics casting rocks here, and then we'll get to it. So I just got to measure out. Let's see here. Let's see if this worked out magically. Oh, and it did. That would take up probably about the same amount of space, so it'll be fair for whichever corner or side of the board you're starting on. Yeah, so we'll do something like that. Leave this here on this side, we'll get some rocks going. Now to do the other side of the board, I'm just going to use that same piece I was showing you, and then I'm going to use it as a template to cut this filler piece beneath it, and then cut this filler piece in half so that I can make it match the terrain piece on the other side. Now, one difference I want to make on either side is I'm going to have them inverted. So there's going to be a bigger rock formation here, and then a channel that goes down here. And on this side, it'll just be the opposite. Big rock formation here, comes down, swoops down on this side. So it'll go something like that. Path kind of down there. And on this one, the path will come here and here. Maybe something more like that. This will go downwards. These two will have matching paths that go downwards, just to switch it up, see if that changes anything. So to make this terrain and make it match that piece of that old D&D terrain, I'm going to use some Woodland Scenics rock molds, and all I do is I score the back of them where they'll need to snap off, and then just snap them by hand. Once they're snapped into place, I can just use some hot glue and get them down. This is only a temporary fix. Hot glue won't hold these forever, especially if they're still a little wet when you're putting them on, so we'll come in later with some Sculptamo to make sure they're stuck in place. Now to build the paths that will be going up these rock faces, I'm just using some spare XPS foam, and then I'm going to come in with a hot wire cutter and form them to shape. Now at some point I decided that on the left side of the board that I wanted there to be a little bit more of a raised area, so there'll be like two tiers here where there's playability on either of them, and so we'll add another rock face type thing here. And like I said earlier, I'm just coming through with my hot wire cutter and just making these paths look more natural, forming that spare XPS foam into a smooth path. Now once they're cut to shape, I'm going to come in with the heat gun and then just seal them up and give them a little bit of a more rounded surface. Now when I have the basic shape, I can use some modeling compound and really blend it in to make it look more realistic. And as I said earlier, the modeling compound is going to help us make sure those rocks are stuck in place. One thing I didn't account for was me being an idiot, which I am. And so when I put my D&D piece on there, I forgot to center it and make sure there was no overhang. So I had to come in with a box cutter later on and make sure it was cut close enough to the edge. And I'll come in with some wall filler and make sure this is a flat end. Once the modeling compound is at a few minutes to dry, I'm going to come back in with the school glue, spread it out the same way I have on the other bases, and we're going back to the tile grout. Just like the other two boards, it gets the isopropyl alcohol and watered down Mod Podge treatment as well. Now, unlike the other two boards, this one actually has some painting involved. So I left everything overnight to dry, and on the next day I was able to bust it back out and start the painting. Now I want this board to match some of the other terrain pieces I've already built, so I'm doing a really simple rock pattern. I would usually like to do something a little bit more advanced, but I don't really feel like repainting all my other terrain pieces. So we're getting a dark gray coat, followed by a black wash, and then a light gray dry brushing after. Once the rocks have been painted, I'll move on to painting the ground texture. So I'm coming in with the burnt umber, the same I do on most of my other terrain pieces, and then I'm going to do a light dry brush with a cashmere tan. Once the rocks in the ground have been painted, I can move on to the flocking process. But for this one, it's a little bit different as I'm watering down the school glue before I apply it to the base. And that's just because I'm going to be using some finer flocks and I want to layer them a little bit more. So using my assortment of Woodland Scenics flocks, I'm going to be putting down some coarse turf and some underbrush around the rock areas or water would pool up a little bit more, and I'm going to be placing that all over the base. Once I'm done that, I'm going to come in with the finer flocks, starting with a mid-green over top of the dark green coarse turf, and then I'm going to finish it off by a burnt grass color on top of that mid-green, just to give some variation and a more realistic feel. Then when I'm done flocking, I'm going to come in with some arid grasslands from Geek Gaming Scenics and just go around some of the stone areas just to tie them in a little bit better and give some more burnt grass and a more realistic approach. Once I've got everything on there, I can spray it all down with some IPA and finally get into a spray bottle as I seal everything in. Finally, to accentuate the path, I'm going to come in with some Vallejo Dark Umber pigment and just go over the areas that I want to seem as though they've been traveled. So right before we get into the final reveals, I want to thank you for watching this video. If you want to check out the terrain I'm making to go along with these 3 boards, I've already made terrain for this board and this board, and then shortly I'll have a video out and I made all this Ionic terrain, Roman stuff. But also check out my Patreon, supporting me there. You get some behind the scenes videos of what I'm up to and some hobby tools that you might not think are hobby tools, stuff like that, and you can vote in the polls for what projects I tackle next. Without any further ado, like this video and subscribe, and let's get to the final reveals.
Shall we begin?